Hello everyone, Ryan here, and a lot has definitely happened in the last few parts that we've now had enough time to really let the story sink in. This time I have something different planned. We're going to be talking about a lot of the spoilery details, so if it isn't obvious by the fact that this is part 8 in one of my Explain series, that means everything that has appeared before is on the table for discussion. There are quite a few things I want to independently talk about, but I think the first thing I want to talk with is the Q&A session that Kotaro Uchikoshi held after the release of the game, and was hosted on the series' official website for that time. This same thing happened for the sequel of this game, Virtue's Last Reward, but for now we're going to focus on the 999 Q&A. Now, I'm not going to run through absolutely every question here, as there's literally 74 of them, and some of them do not involve elements of the game's plot, which is the main focus of this video, but I definitely recommend reading these yourself, as they're all very interesting. The wonderful folks over helming the Zero Escape Wiki have compiled all of the questions and answers from this period. Huge thanks for the record-keeping side of this fandom, because it makes this all so much easier. With all of that said, let's dive into this. Question 3 states, where did Santa and June go after the true ending? And he answers, to be honest, it's possible that what went on in Building Q might have just been the prologue to an even larger scheme. If that was the case, then you could say that they were heading off to prepare the rest of their plan after the true ending. Which, if anything, is just a huge sequel tease. Question number 4 asks, given Gentaro Hongo's obvious instability, why was a loaded gun placed in the coffin? Whose use did Akane intend it for? Just Santa, since he was in on it? To which she gives the answer, Akane had seen everything through Junpei's eyes 9 years before. If she didn't recreate the situation exactly, then she wouldn't have been able to save herself as a child. That's the reason for the gun, and why it was loaded. So this brings me to a discussion I need to have for clarification's sake. We're going to double back on this in future answers, but no, when this game came out, some people didn't understand the mechanics of the time travel / projection that Akane used in the story, or the mechanics of the twist in general. The present of the story as we're led to believe it is the story we're seeing through Junpei's eyes, but the reveal is that really it is only one present, as we're experiencing the events through Junpei's eyes, through Akane's eyes. The present is Akane as we're in the incinerator, as she connects with Junpei 9 years in the future. She's seeing the game there, and thus knows how to make it if she's going to create the timeline where she will survive the incinerator. For her to survive the incinerator, she needs Junpei to be able to connect back with her. They need to mutually have that connection. So everything that happens within the story, minus the death of the 3 Cradle Pharmaceutical executives, as that was just some fun collateral damage that Akane can consider plausible deniability, since she manipulated Hongo into committing those murders, as she knew that he'd fear them ratting him out. That's a side tangent we'll get back to much later in the series, but aside from that, everything inside the Nonary game that Junpei goes through is solely and specifically in order to create this moment. The other players are here first and foremost because Akane saw them here. All of this is what is known as a bootstrap paradox. Honestly, one of my favorite thought experiments. It is an event that has no origin, because through the fragility of temporal space, an event is created, but only because the event has been created to make the event happen in the first place. To make this simple, we'll use the variables we already know from the game's story. Young Akane lives up to the point where she's thrown into the incinerator. Inside, she sees the events of 9 years in the future take place, and because of that information she's seen, she's able to recreate those events down to the T 9 years later. And because she's done so, it guarantees her success, as she would have needed to live in order to recreate those events 9 years later. However, she would only have lived if Junpei was able to give her the answer, because she did live, and thus she was able to recreate the events 9 years in the future. Do you see the crux of the issue here? The answer of the puzzle is the paradox here. Did Junpei have it? Well, how could he have had it if the situation predicates on events 9 years before he ever gave the answer? This is a topic we're going to be following up on much later as well, but this brings to mind 2 concepts. First is the many worlds theory, or to put in simpler terms, the multiverse. This idea is a lot more palatable to people nowadays with big media franchises like the MCU bringing the concept to the layman, but we shouldn't even have to think if this game is vying into that territory because we've already seen alternate timelines play out, each one of those bad endings we've encountered along the way. And because of this, Junpei was able to access the morphogenetic field and grab answers from other timelines he had no business of having, such as the coffin password. Then there's the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. It always comes back to you. Anyway, I've explained this probably like 3 times at this point on my channel, but just in case, I'll run through the thought experiment quick. Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment that deals with quantum mechanics. The supposed cat is hypothetically placed inside a box with a bottle of poison, a Geiger counter connected to a source of radiation. If the Geiger counter detects a single trace of radioactivity, the glass of poison will be shattered, and the cat will die. When the box is sealed, the thought is that the cat is simultaneously both alive and dead until its fate can be observed, as there exists a near infinite amount of possibilities within. The first possible atom to decay could do so near immediately upon the sealing of the box, killing the cat instantly. Or you could be in the situation where you happen to continually avoid breaking the glass until the heat death of the universe. Because of the existence of multiple realities divorced by choice and separation of event, theoretically, one of those realities does exist, but we cannot confirm until we choose to observe it. Taking it back to Zero Escape terms, Akane is the cat. She's locked in the sealed box, being the incinerator, and until the moment of her death, she does or does not pass. She's considered both alive and dead simultaneously. Now wait, hold on, you say. There's been evidence that she's been alive in the future, you say. We've experienced meeting her 9 years older, and we've seen her pretty consistently throughout the game, you say. I'll just say that we'll come back to this, but right now let's run with the idea that Akane was much like ourselves playing the game. She's seeing the future, but not necessarily seeing just one future. She's seeing them all play out. She's searching for the timeline that guarantees her survival. The next question is going to go on a tiny side tangent, but I feel like it's necessary to cover. Question 5 reads, the characters and plot are really well done in this game. I was just curious as to how you developed them all so well. What do you work on first, plot or characters? Do you know when they're complete? Where do you draw inspiration from? For me, I first start by creating a rough draft of the characters' personalities. Then I make a sort of rough draft of the setting. Next, I figure out the twist for the story and work toward that by coming up with a plot that fits the particular twist perfectly. So the twist comes first, basically. Of course, the characters and the setting that I come up with early on almost always end up drastically changed. I write a rough draft, then I draw a line, then erase my rough draft, then draw a new line. It's just that process over and over. I don't know when it's done until I finish writing the whole script. I always write my stories thinking, I wonder what's going to happen to these guys afterwards. Overall, I don't change the twist, but I will change the story a lot to get to it. So as far as inspiration goes, all that I can say is it mostly comes from me, while I'm writing my drafts. I believe that when I concentrate very hard on writing, all of my worldly thoughts just go away, so perhaps that has something to do with it. Also, this particular idea is in the game as well, but I need some danger to have that moment of clarity and inspiration. The closer I get to a deadline, the more I think, crap, the deadline's coming up, and that helps me come up with great ideas. So I'll try to work myself into a corner like that, and I also have the product manager and the other people on the team to help me out by getting me into that mode of thinking. So, this question here, amongst everything, was probably the most singular important that I've ever experienced. This is how I write, and it was solely because this question and answer unlocked my brain to that possibility. Stories for me from the day that I read this changed just like that. I wanted to highlight this and the chance that it could do something similar for someone else. But this is why I create stories, and it is so insane to see how important a moment that this was for me, and see it still resonate so strongly. Question 7 then reads, why was Lotus in the second Nonary game and not Nona? And Uchikoshi responds, I mentioned this earlier, but Akane's intent was to reenact the future she saw through Junpei's eyes. She saw Lotus, so she chose Lotus to be part of the second Nonary game. If you don't care for that answer, then you can think of it as she needed Lotus in order to solve the puzzle in the laboratory room. He goes on to the next answer to dive a little deeper to say that Lotus is currently supporting herself as a freelance programmer and dresses like a dancer because she likes to. Her hobby is to belly dance, so she likes to dress in more freeing clothing. Question 9 reads, so June's watch was really 9 and Santa's was 0? Why did his watch show 3? Even if his 3 is really E, that would mean his number was 6. E equals 15 in hexadecimal, and then 1 plus 5 equals 6. And Uchikoshi responds, Originally, I was thinking of making it E stands for empty, so E equals 0 in the scenario, but it felt forced and I didn't want people to think that, so I cut that part out. By the way, in hexadecimal E is 14, and the digital root would be 5. So there's a point about this that I want to touch on that is some extra cool foreshadowing. It's such a cool moment that when you realize that Aoi always goes with Akane through the doors, but do you want two really cool moments to go, oh shit, to? So, the Nintendo DS version of 999 had 2 cover arts, one that originally came out over here, and the second which was updated after the release of Virtue's Last Reward to denote it as part 1 of the Zero Escape series. Now, this second art, which I love so much more, has a secret if you flip it upside down. Obviously, 999 when flipped upside down gives you the mark of the beast, but it then reveals Akane's bracelet as 9. Now, in-game they use the logic that Akane's bracelet is 0 and Santa's is 9, which makes sense if Akane is 0, as in the orchestrator of events, but there is merit to Santa's 3 equaling E and Akane's 6 equals 9. I like both ideas, so I like that it's brought up here. Second and simpler is Aoi and Akane are the only 2 people who have bracelets over sleeves. A sort of subtle implication that no matter what, they are free from the consequence of the threat of the game as its orchestrators. Question 13 dives deeper into the explanation I was giving around the situation surrounding Akane and the incinerator. It reads, what exactly is the true ending all about? How can June/Akane be alive during the nonary game, yet dead from 9 years earlier? And why is the final puzzle upside down? Is it supposed to be as if you're seeing the last puzzle from Akane's perspective? I get a lot of these quota questions in Japan too, but I want you to think about it from another perspective. If, hypothetically, the story in 999 is about Akane dying 9 years ago, and Santa coming up with the whole plan to save his sister's life, then what happens if Junpei does save Akane 9 years in the past? Does she suddenly materialize in front of everyone? Or will she just appear in some remote location? Wouldn't that be even stranger? If that happened, then what was she doing during the 9 years since the first nonary game? It seems to me that she would have had to exist somewhere, Then it's only natural for her to exist in Building Q, don't you think? In fact, don't you think it makes a lot more sense if that's the case? Let's say that right now, you discover how to access the past, and you save a kitten that was supposed to have been run over by a truck. That kitten would be alive an hour ago, even 2 hours ago, right? I mean, you saved it 3 days ago. That's what I was trying to portray. Now, in regard to your question about the last puzzle being upside down, my thinking was that the top screen was the future and the bottom screen was the past. So if you solve the puzzle on the top screen, that means that Junpei single-handedly solved the puzzle in the future. That's what I was trying to portray. We're still going to touch more on the topic of Akane's existence in the future, don't you worry, I haven't forgotten that tack. We're going to keep that for a second still, as question 14 moves on to the topic of Alice. Why did they put Alice at the end of that real ending like that? Also, why wasn't there a cool CG with Junpei and Akane at the end? Was she really Alice? How do you know? We never show a real picture of Alice in the game. There's an image of her, but that was only what Junpei imagined her to look like when he heard the cool story about Alice. Or perhaps that was an image of how Alice as Akane knew her? You could say that perhaps the image was sent by Akane to Junpei's brain. If that was the case, then what is the physical appearance of Alice that Akane knew? Pretty intriguing, right? Whatever the case, it means that Alice was a person who actually existed. In order to get that across, I decided to have her show up in the ending. As to why there isn't a picture at the end of Junpei and Akane, regardless of the reasons, Akane was the mastermind, and her scheme led to the deaths of at least a few people. How could she show her face to them after doing all of that? That's why she's hiding. Also, I mentioned earlier that she had been gone to prepare for the larger things she had planned. Again, we are getting some more breadcrumbs to the sequel story will be, so we're going to tuck that away for later. Question 15 goes more into Akane's character, reading, why is June such a sadist? She places bombs in the Ninth Man and Nagisa Nijisaki. Nagisa Nijisaki is one of the people who killed her in an alternate history. She's the sort of woman who will do whatever it takes to achieve her goals. Even though she seems like a nice girl, she's always plotting rather cold things. She'd easily kill someone if she needed to. Her personality is a result of what happened to her 9 years before. Perhaps there are things that happened on that ship that couldn't be shown in the actual game. So, here is one of my favorite discussion points of the entire game. The morality of Akane Kurashige is so fascinating. Uchikoshi has said that she's his favorite character in anything he's ever written, and that's true to this day. and I find it very easy to see why. Akane is so complex. She's a young girl who simply wants to live, and that's a motivation anybody can relate with given her situation. But she has done some reprehensible things. Everything in the Nonary games of the future is directly because she and Aoi have specifically engineered it to happen. Aoi himself has doubted their mission. Do you remember his Two Santas story? Let's listen to that again.
Oh, it's...
Santa? What are you looking at?
It's a photo. It's my sister.
Sister? Santa, you've got a sister?
Yeah. Kid was cute as a button.
She was only about an inch tall then? Oh, sorry. I guess an inch is a little large for a button. Probably more like a half inch. Sorry.
Why are you looking at it?
I was her Santa Claus.
Wait, what?
Have you ever heard the story of the two Santa Clauses? It goes that a long time ago, there were two Santas. One of them wore white, and the other one wore black. The white Santa gave presents to good kids, and the black Santa played tricks on bad kids. They went on like that for a while, but eventually the black Santa's tricks started to get worse and worse. Pretty soon, the white Santa couldn't stand it anymore, and he stabbed the black Santa to death. When he stabbed the other Santa, the white Santa got blood all over his clothes. And that's why, these days, his clothes are red. You could say that red is all that's left of the black Santa. I wonder which Santa I am, the white Santa or the black Santa.
Huh.
All right, let's go.
When Santa asks which Santa he is, he's not being coy about the fact that they shared a name. He's seriously at war within himself over the things he's doing. He's working to save his sister, the White Santa, but he's trapped the players of the game and the other Cradle members in-game from that. His recollection killed his sister, or didn't, but had the threat to, depending on which timeline. He's had to orchestrate, lie, and do so much that he wonders if he's gone from the White Santa to the Black, or if he's the White Santa that's killed the Black to become the Red, which honestly sounds the most true to the situation. The good Santa who does bad to prevent bad. And then on another tack is how manipulative Akane is. It's a very common thing to notice how much Akane flirts with Junpei over the course of the game. I specifically chose the ending orders I did, so I believe the story is engineered to develop intrigue with Akane, and you follow up on Junpei's urge to want to protect her. The door choices start off with basically, do you go with Akane or do you ignore her? Obviously freedom means there will always be variables, but I would like to assume that most players are geared toward going with Akane on their first playthrough, because they want to know either more about why someone Junpei knows is here, senses some romantic tension between them two, something she's apt to follow up on and reward the player and Junpei for, because this leads to the game's knife ending, which I consider to be the best first ending to get, but ultimately it also leads to the true ending that guarantees her survival. And let's be honest, you thought it was weird that given all of this, after not seeing Akane for 9 years, the first thing she chooses to do when they clear the air is to start to tease him about how many guys she's been with, then immediately after is quick to relieve Junpei of his worries by saying she's been with no guys? Or the elevator conversation, where Akane is too innocent uwu to realize that she's dropping more innuendos than the weight of the Titanic itself. No. This idea of June is perfectly created in order to create the future that guarantees her survival. What are one of the requirements for that timeline again? Junpei has to connect with her, and he needs to save her. Sure, if he learned the girl he had a crush on 9 years ago is in danger, he'd maybe do something to help. Junpei is generally a good guy who would step in to help someone, but think of this from the lens of someone who's on death's door. Think of this from the lens of a 12-year-old who is on death's door. She needs to guarantee that he'll be there. She needs to stoke that fire and make sure this is the most important thing he needs to do. And of course, this also leads to the pseudoscience. Before I go on that tack though, I want to make one thing clear. Just because I say Akane is a manipulative mastermind does not mean that I don't think she doesn't care for Junpei. I think it is very clear that she does have very deep feelings for Junpei, and were circumstances of her life different, she would happily follow them to their natural conclusion. However, she does not have that opportunity, at least yet. She was put into a horrifying, terrible situation where her only choice is to die or to do whatever she can to survive. However, doing so means she'll need to make a lot of difficult choices, and this pretty much guarantees the number of people who truly know what she's thinking behind the mask will be few and far between. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who fully understands the truth of Akane outside of Aoi. Now, back to the pseudoscience. One common criticism of Uchikoshi's writing style is that characters will forgo the danger of the current situation they're in to give you a physics or philosophy lesson, and act as serious throughout it as anything else. Honestly, I'm a sucker for these, so I welcome them in troves whenever they come, because I love these as branching paths for further self-learning on things I'd tangentially heard of, or even never heard of before. I just think it's cool, applies for a lot of it, but there's actually a legitimate reason for why these are here in most cases. Junpei is a staunchly skeptic kind of character to anything supernatural or otherwise wacky. He's a pretty general layman, and given this, asking someone like this to fully accept not only the existence of multiple timelines, but also that you can access an invisible field that psychic people can communicate information to loved ones, and also you have to use that invisible field to send a children's puzzle back 9 years in the past to save the girl you once had a crush on in grade school. Yeah, that's not going to go well in any timeline. Except for the timeline where Akane goes out of her way to introduce various supernatural stories about how haunted the Titanic is, how some people are able to communicate with their past selves on having died on the Titanic, how different comparisons to Ice-9 glycerin molecules act, which is sort of like this really important thing in the human brain with the morphogenetic field. It's all to get Junpei at least thinking about the topics, so that when he has the experience himself, when he remembers the coffin password and the true ending, he doesn't just immediately shrug it off like nothing happened or, oh, that was weird. They need him to consider, to act on his suspicion, all fed to him in every conversation that ends as another straw in the ultimate haystack. Of course, this being just for Akane and Aoi, but when other characters do it, being Seven, Lotus, and Clover, well, these are a bit special cases. Lotus is a case of a person who is knowledgeable about these things, and the circumstances of the Nonori games helped prompt the topic for conversation, but she's definitely on the other side of the scale, being a full skeptic. When she brings up the story of the morphogenetic fields, she reveals that she's just fucking around. She thinks it's an interesting point of conversation, but doesn't subscribe to the pseudoscience of it one bit. She's a facts and logic kind of girl. Which this, funnily enough, shows in the true ending when everybody else is locked into what's going on, and she's all, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Clover is interesting because she's fully in tune with the events of Morphic Resonance, as she was one of the people who experienced and survived the previous Nonori game. Although she is told by Snake not to tell anyone else this information for fear of Zero killing them. But en route we're able to gain Clover's trust, and the realization that Snake isn't the one who was dead behind door 3 shows she's more comfortable with sharing that information about the previous game. At least until Hongo comes to interrupt us and he has more than enough reason to. Seven is the odd one out of this, as he does have knowledge of the experiment, being the detective who investigated it. Though, the course of the game he has amnesia. Maybe. The ending makes this a bit more interesting a topic of conversation, but we're gonna stick a tack in that for later and just move on to the next question. Question 19 reads, was Akane or June phasing in and out of reality when she had headaches? I was at a loss to understand how she could have existed if she had died in the past. And the answer is, I guess this is the exact opposite of what was asked in question 13. Yes, you're right. If she was dead in the past, that means she didn't exist in the present. So her headaches were there to show you that you were approaching a past that couldn't exist. So we finally take one of those tacks out. Yes, each of those times when Akane was feeling ill, something easily able to write off as her just being a sensitive, little, fragile little squirrel who doesn't like blood and violence, is actually depth to her character in that this only happens on endings that aren't the true route. The box is being opened, and it's being more and more clear that Akane really did die 9 years ago. And if that is the case, then she can't have possibly existed here in the future. Given that, she falls ill, and eventually, as we see in the safe ending, vanishes completely. This is why the alternate name for this ending is the Zero Lost ending. She's dead, and the timeline has corrected this fact. Question 22 asks more about who killed us during the submarine ending, and Uchi makes it clear that it was Ace in this ending, and Lotus's missing bracelet was supposed to be a hint toward this. Ace's 1 to Kubota's 9 to Lotus's 8 makes 9 for escape through the number 9 door. This reveals that he was faking it when we found him in the hallway. The next question is interesting. Question 24 asks, why did Seven, Snake, and even Santa insist that Akane had died 9 years before, yet she was clearly there the entire time? He says, Santa lied about her death in order to save her. Since Snake was on the ship too, we can assume that he knew the truth about Akane's death as well. If we are going to believe that Seven didn't lie, then we can assume that a fake memory was implanted in his mind somehow. If I tried to explain that in the story though, I was worried people would think I was just coming up with random excuses, so I left it up to the player's interpretation. If it makes more sense to say that both Snake and Seven were in on the plot with Santa and lied to move things along, I'm totally fine with that. This goes to the point I was saying earlier. Seven's amnesia is an interesting point, because it is entirely plausible that this was a ploy, considering that his amnesia clears up at some pretty convenient times to give Junpei the exact information he needs when he asks the right questions, or plays along to certain explanations. This would also give credence as to why he would entertain conversations about the crystallization of glycerin or extra saint detergents. I personally headcanon Seven as a willing participant along with Seven, but there are details about this that we won't be able to talk about until much later. Since Clover was not on the ship, she does not have any extra information. Seven would lie about Hanko's identity or Akane's death. Question 25 reads, did they ever catch up to Akane and Aoi in the end? And Uchikoshi says, nope, they didn't. Junpei goes on to spend the rest of his life chasing after her. There's another question getting into the specifics of the bootstrap paradox, and for the parts that were handled in other answers, Uchi directly relates those specifically. But question number 29 reads, this is about the scene where Jun connected with Junpei of 9 years in the future. Can I safely assume that the world Junpei is in is a future where Jun is saved from the incinerator, and that 9 years later Jun became Zero to prevent a time paradox? And Uchi responds, she herself stated at one point that she is less than Zero 9 years ago. That's exactly right. And for some quick clarification on what happened to the future Akane during all of this, from question 31. In the incinerator, Junpei of the present accessed Akane of the past and saved her. The current Akane/Jun snuck out while Junpei and the rest weren't looking, and she disappeared before the door was locked. Question 35 goes into some detail regarding Lotus's children. Who is Nona's twin? Both she and Nona seem important. Since Nona means 9 and Nona has a twin, there's gotta be another spinoff at least. Originally, I intended for Nona's twin to be named Enya, so both their names would technically be 9. In regards to them appearing in a sequel, I'm not sure. I guess if we get many requests like that, it would be possible. Now, to let you down gently, Enya does not appear in any fashion after this interview, with one exception we'll talk about next time, but it's good to have a name. Question 36 reads, if both Aoi and Akane are in the ship, and they are both transmitters, then who is the 9th person that should be Akane's replacement in the Nevada building? Is he or she the only one that doesn't have siblings, and supposed to be Akane's receiver? Of course, there was a girl who took Akane's place. There was some confusion, and the two of them were swapped. That would have meant that Building Q in Nevada, there were 2 sisters in the same location. So far as Akane in receiving, she was especially good at sending, but that didn't mean that she could only send. She has the ability to receive as well. All of the children have both. Some were just better at one than the other. Question 39 goes to talk about Hongo in the ending. Why was Ace allowed to live in the end while his cohorts were killed? He seems to be the biggest monster. Uchi responds, I think it was because he was the person she felt the most animosity towards. Because there was so much hatred towards him, she didn't want to let him die that easily. She wanted him to admit his sins and either be judged legally, or even just wanted him to admit his faults in public. That is what I believe Akane and Santa's motives were. If the people involved all died, then the truth would have been lost. I believe they wanted everyone to know about the horrific event they'd been forced to take part in. Question 41 turns to the 9th man. Teruaki Kubota, number 9, the 9th man. Who was he? Or to be more precise, I suppose, what kind of person was he? Is he the reason the submarine was there, for instance? Is the reason why he was such a hurry to get through door 5 alone was because he intended to confess? Was there any particular reason why he was part of our main group instead of the other two? Teraraki Kubota was the only person who was a coward and went crazy and exploded to death. That personality is why he was chosen as the 9th member. Of course, the most important thing was for Akane to recreate what happened 9 years ago. Kubota has nothing to do with the submarine. It is believed that the submarine was already there when Ace, Gantaro, purchased the ship from Gordain. There was a submarine in the building in Nevada, so the building Q would be an exact replica of that ship. Then we get into an interesting topic, as you may have wondered what that get-up Snake was in when we rescued him from the coffin. Question 44 reads, what did the robe that Snake was wearing after you rescued him out of the coffin mean? And what did the flags next to the coffin mean? Well, we sort of made Nagisa Nijisaki wear Snake's clothes. I believe the only other thing he could have worn were the ceremonial clothes in Building Q. I think Akane and Celta felt bad that they made Snake naked. As a side note, that ceremonial outfit belonged to Gordain. Back in the day, he and his friends were conducting strange ceremonies in the incinerator. As another side note, the nonary game wasn't Gintaro's idea, it was Gordain's. He would take young Englishmen who had accumulated massive debts and force them to play games on the ship. He would enjoy the show with his millionaire friends, and they'd bet money on who would survive. All the losers were burned in the incinerator as a sacrifice during the ceremony. After many years of this, Gordain died of old age, but the games continued. In the final game, Gintaro was abducted and forced to participate. He was victorious and felt that if he could win the game, he could come up with a better one. He told Gordain's successor and his fellow millionaires as such. They decided it sounded interesting and told him to do it. That was when he held the nonary game that happened 9 years before 999. Of course, Gintaro's true intention was to test the theory of morphogenetic fields, but that was the story behind the nonary game. He inherited the ship from the millionaires and hosted the game. That was how he got all the funding as well. In other words, there were millionaires watching the game 9 years before 999 and placing bets on who would live and who would die. Yes, they were truly rotten people. That was also when Gintaro found the mandrake root in the coffin. He used that root to create the drug, Soparol, that made him a millionaire. Ooh, so this is interesting lore. So, Dashiell Gordain is the one we heard slightly about in the main game. The nonary games originated as a sort of different style of death games, in a sort of historic cult-like idea that sprung from fanaticism over the Titanic, and the culture that pervades, with the nonary games as we now know them being an evolution and reward for Hongo for completing his. Question 52 then swaps back to talking about some of the character names. Lotus and Seven. All the other characters had their real names revealed by the end of the game. I guess this is a minor detail, but it'd be nice to know. What are Lotus and Seven's real names? Uchi responds, in the Japanese version, Lotus's name is revealed to be Kashiwabara. It's revealed in the torture room. Her first name wasn't revealed in the game, but I was thinking it'd probably be Hazuki. Hazuki means August in Old Japanese. Her ex-husband was named Ichiro. Ichiro means firstborn son in Japanese. So that gives you 1, and then the 8 from August gives you 9. That's why her twins are named Nona and Enya. 7, though, I didn't really give him a name. Talking about a hypothetical sequel to 999's story, we have question 53. If there was going to be a sequel, would it be a direct one, or one set in a different timeline, like future or past, or alternate universe, or different place altogether? Uchi responds, if there were to be one, I would come up with completely different characters, and then mix in some of the characters from 999 and build a story from that. Of course, the setting will be them being stuck in a room they can't get out of. The storyline would be after the events of 999. Of course, this is all hypothetical. Next one's just for funsies, but question 54 reads, supposing that Junpei and the 9th Man actually had code names for themselves like the rest of the characters, what would they probably have been? Well, since Junpei's number is 5, I would have called him Hand, because of the 5 fingers on a hand. Or Star, since a star is 5 points. Or maybe Penta from Pentagon. As for the 9th Man, that'd be hard. Maybe Pigeon? In kanji, pigeon would be the number 9 plus the kanji for bird. Question 56 actually brings up a bit of a plot hole concerning the bottom screen, or the novel view being Akane's POV. I'd heard the bottom screen represents Akane's perspective of the nonary game in the past, when Junpei finds the keycards with the photographs in the cargo room. They're of the current nonary game participants. This would be impossible if it was still Akane's perspective, as it shows the participants of Junpei's time. Is the inventory the only exception to the Akane perspective idea? Very sharp. That was something that was pointed out by my debugging staff. Sorry, if you could make an exception and just say this was something Akane saw through Junpei's eyes, that'd be great. This reaction to something like this is very funny, and similarly how I handle when I get too caught up in my ideas and something slips through the cracks. It's sort of refreshing seeing a creative respond to criticism in such a healthy and kind of funny way. Question 62 alludes to something I want to bring up later. How did Seven get his scars? He didn't have them during the flashback sequences. He got them in an incident that took place after the first Nonary game 9 years before. He was battling against a particular powerful global organization. Interesting. Question 65 goes into the logistics of Akane and Aoi's plans. How did June and Santa manage to pull off staging the second Nonary game in the first place? How did they manage to finance it, reset, refurbish, use the facility, kidnap such big important people all on their own? I get the why of it all. It's just the how that doesn't really add up for me. And as a side note, just to be clear, was June just acting innocent, or was she actually a much more ruthless person than she portrayed to everyone else? Well, the 12-year-old Akane saw through the eyes of Junpei 9 years in the future that Cradle Pharmaceutical would suddenly become a huge company. She told her brother Aoi to buy stock in Cradle Pharmaceutical when they were cheap. So they made a ton of money when it eventually listed on the stock exchange. They took that money and invested in other stocks and increased their fortune. Before long, they were millionaires and eventually formed an organization to help with the execution of their plans. It wasn't just the two of them doing everything. They had dozens of underlings working for them. Santa buying stocks is mentioned in the game itself as well. Question 66 then asks, how did Clover know the number discovered from the Truth Is Gone riddle was for the safe in the piano room behind door 5? She didn't go through door 5, and none of the 3 people who went through door 5 told her about it. Also, is there any significance for the 8-digit combination number for the coffin? She found a note that Kagachika Musashido had written when he was alive in the captain's room. She learned about the safe in the piano room from him. As far as the meaning behind the numbers, I haven't really told anyone in any other interviews, so I'm going to make this just between us. If you take the number 14383421 and multiply it by 9, you get 129450789. What do all those numbers mean? I'll leave that up to your interpretation. So this is a cool detail, but the coffin password is the true order number of the bracelet numbers divided by 9. It's so cool. Question 69, nice, asks, does Junpei realize Akane risked his life and the life of 6 others, not including her own, by setting up the second Nonary game? Or does he simply not care and loves her despite her selfishness? When he realized the truth, Junpei understood everything. That's why, in the game, we made sure that despite it all being completely planned out, he still had to save her. I suppose you can call it selfishness, but if Junpei didn't save her, then a 12-year-old girl will die. Junpei did have strong feelings for her, yes, but that wouldn't really matter. Even if it were just some stranger, Junpei would have saved her regardless. No matter how he might have been tricked, or put in danger, or murdered in an alternative history, Junpei would have done the same thing. Question 73 goes back to the topic I was talking about with Akane's true nature and her method of manipulation. Is the June that Akane presents herself as during the game show how she really is, or is she really more like Ace, just acting and really kind of crazy? And also, it was implied that the group was going to meet up with June and Santa during the true end. I assume that means the group didn't hold any ill will towards June and Santa? Uchi answers, I guess we have a lot of these questions from the US. To be honest, I didn't get very many questions like this in Japan. Most of the questions in Japan are about Alice, or if Seven was lying. This is so interesting. I could have sworn I wrote, Akane shall become 0 in the game. But there were a few people who really believed that Santa was 0. Anyway, putting that aside, as far as how the other 5 feel about Akane and Santa, I'm sure they have pretty mixed feelings. It's true that bracelets didn't have detonators in them, nor were they actually implanted with bombs, but they were lied to. Still, they were lied to so they could save a 12-year-old girl. I feel they're in a situation where they want to hold grudges, but at the same time they really can't bring themselves to do it. And finally, we have a question going back to the very beginning of the story. Who kidnapped Junpei? I know it's 0, but who is the person doing all the kidnappings? With Uchi answering, this is also something that not too many people know about, but the person wearing the gas mask was actually Akane. The kidnappings were done by her brother Santa, and as I mentioned in question 65, she had a number of people from her organization helping her out. Okay, and this is the end of the official 999 Q&A, and now we transition to the pieces of foreshadowing I want to talk about that the QA didn't highlight or otherwise cool details. Now, one point toward the Akane vision and the Nonary games puts it, when you're looking over the dead bodies of Kubota or Nijisaki, you get very interesting descriptions. Something that a 12-year-old kid would probably come up with. In regards to Nijisaki, the scene goes, it looked as though the explosion had been quite powerful. His legs were both bent in an odd, unnatural way, and his left arm had split open. exposing the painfully white bone of his ulna. His bracelet lay next to him. It seemed to have hit the wall hard enough to shatter the display, which lay on the ground in pieces. Half of his head had simply collapsed. The blood coating it almost made it look like raw pizza dough covered in tomato sauce. His clothes, too, were covered in blood. The burgundy tie, the white shirt, the jacket with the yellow piping, the gray slacks. And in regards to Kubota, Junpei suspected the detonation had thrown him against the wall. Half of his face was crushed, and the other half was covered in blood. Most of his abdomen had been emptied, either by the explosion or by gravity. He had landed on his back, and stark white ribs jutted up out of his chest like the legs of some sort of macabre crab. Junpei felt something flip in his stomach. In the safe ending, the narration is actually interrupted when Hongo draws his gun and points it to Lotus's head. As the events of the future are happening so fast, the Akane of the past can't keep up. Additionally, in the original Nintendo DS version, as opposed to the Nonary game's release, a lot of the lore dumps involving Cradle Pharmaceutical and Soporo are relayed from Akane's memory, as she already knows them, versus us seeing the conversation of them telling Junpei about it. This is one of the concessions of the adventure view in the Nonary games, as these are more integrated into the dialogue in that version. It wasn't clear in the way that I presented it, but in the original DS version, the final puzzle has you turn your DS entirely upside down. As opposed to how the rest of the game is going, you're solving the puzzle and sending that information back to Akane in the past, versus Akane solving the puzzle in the past to send that information forward. Back in the shower room, we find Nijisaki's body, and we think it's Snake's. Santa talks about how the human body dies at 75 degrees centigrade after examining the thermostat. He says a human body could only get that hot if it was in the sauna too long or in an incinerator. And then he gets all pissy because Junpei has dismissed this as random trivia, and hardly even noticed that Santa's mood withered as he was talking about that. Mentioned before in my section about Akane using pseudoscience to get Junpei to believe in the supernatural position they're in, but the story Akane tells about William's dead is near identical to her own situation, except she's seeing it through his eyes instead of her own. When we're exploring the first-class cabin with Snake, there's a funny dialogue piece that I'm purposely hid to avoid drawing attention to it that alludes to Snake's real name, Light. When we examine the lamp in the room, well, at least we've got light. What? What the hell, man? It's just a light. Oh, of course. Going back to the 9th door, realizing it's actually a lowercase q might make a bit more sense if you take it from the Japanese POV. The word for 9 in Japanese is Q, which is pronounced just like the English letter Q. Since the announcement was being given orally, it makes the homophone easier to understand. In the English version, the rules are written on the Braille notice that Snake has, so you can make the leap that Zero never vocalized that the final door was a 9. Another neat detail is the question of, why would Zero put a gun in the vicinity where Hongo could get it? Outside of the answer of, Akane saw it there, so there it must go, it's actually funny because it's a kind of serious microaggression against Hongo himself. The coffin is locked behind the puzzle that requires the player to sort the different characters by their headshots, i.e. their faces. Hongo was never going to be able to unlock the gun by himself because of his prosopagnosia. Now we get to the final puzzle, the Sudoku/password input. Obviously, I'm with the majority in that I much prefer it and the style of solving it in the DS version to the Nonary Games version. Now, I can understand the change as since 999's release, Sudoku was a much less common puzzle for the layman to understand back then. Nowadays, with how many puzzles are in the common sphere, Wordle, Connections, Sudoku, there are books upon books that are even advertised to children in how to do Sudoku. This defeats the purpose of Akane being forced to do this puzzle and her ability not to be able to solve it being the crux of the Nonary games of the future even happening in the first place. In the time that the game originally released, this made more sense. So even though I do think this puzzle is way inferior, I understand why it was adjusted, even though I think it's a much easier puzzle to solve, so I guess that maybe defeats the purpose. Anyways, I digress. Though I do like the idea with the added context, with the 9-year time gap, and with more and more people learning how to do Sudoku, just in the general layman's terms, more people in Junpei's time would know more about Sudoku and generally how to solve them. Akane is banking on this reality. And that is all of the points that I wanted to specifically make comment on. There's way more detail here that is given extra meaning and context upon having knowledge of the full story, and I highly recommend you play this game yourself, even after you've gotten the story told to you through this series, as I guarantee you'll find something that turns that little light bulb on and gives new understanding to something. This is one of my favorite stories of all time, Every piece of this massive puzzle comes together so brilliantly, and it features such an absolutely amazing cast, such a mind-numbing plot twist, really good music, and it's so multi-dimensional that not even in the literal sense. Akane is such an interesting character, and I definitely intend to cover the other Zero Escape games to talk more about these characters and uncover more of the mysteries the story has in store for us. The next episode will be the final one of this series, rounding off to a nice, neat 9, and it is going to be a full audiobook rendition of the novelization's fan translation, 999 Alterna. That episode is going to take some time, understandably, so I will make more announcements when that is closer. But until then, I hope you all have a good day, and if you like the series, definitely let me know by checking out more of my stuff or giving me your thoughts down below. Check you guys next time.